For 9 years, nobody at Blackmore Castle had seen the Duke hesitate. Not when neighbouring nobles challenged him. Not when Parliament attempted to seize portions of his land. Not when 3 consecutive winters ruined harvests across the county. Not even when his own engagement collapsed in the most public scandal the kingdom had witnessed in a decade. The Duke never hesitated. He never doubted. He never changed his mind. At least, that was what everyone believed. Duke Sebastian Ashcroft ruled Blackmore the way generals ruled battlefields, efficiently, coldly, without apology. The servants called him the Iron Duke when he wasn't listening. The tenants respected him. The neighbouring nobles feared him. The newspapers loved writing about him. But nobody loved him, and that suited Sebastian perfectly. Love had cost him enough already. Blackmore Castle stood on a cliff overlooking the sea. Massive grey towers rose against the sky. Storm winds constantly circled its walls. The estate was beautiful, powerful, impressive, and completely lifeless. The grand ballroom remained closed most of the year. The music room gathered dust. The gardens bloomed without anyone stopping to admire them. Even laughter seemed unwelcome inside those walls. Sebastian preferred it that way. Joy complicated things. Feelings complicated things. People complicated things. His life was easier without all 3. Then came the marriage auction. The idea had not been his. His aunt, Lady Beatrice Ashcroft, had spent 5 years trying to convince him to marry. She failed. His advisers tried. They failed. His friends tried. They failed. Finally, Pounds, the old woman, announced she was done asking. "If you won't choose a wife," she told him, "I'll create circumstances that force you to." Sebastian ignored her. That turned out to be a mistake. 3 months later, invitations were sent across the kingdom. A charity marriage auction. Eligible noblewomen would attend. Eligible noblemen would bid. The proceeds would support orphanages and hospitals. Society immediately became obsessed. Newspapers covered every detail. Families travelled from distant provinces. Mothers pushed daughters toward participation. Daughters dreamed of becoming duchesses. Sebastian hated every second of it, especially because everyone assumed he would choose the most beautiful woman present. They were wrong. Sebastian had no interest in beauty. Beauty had betrayed him once already. 9 years earlier he had fallen deeply in love with Lady Vivian Hawthorne, the kingdom's most admired beauty. He planned to marry her, build a future with her, trust her. Then she abandoned him for a prince. Not because she loved the prince, because she loved the crown. Since that day, Sebastian trusted appearances less than storms. Beautiful faces hid dangerous intentions. Beautiful smiles hid selfish hearts. He wanted none of it. So when the auction day finally arrived, Sebastian made a private decision. He would choose the plainest woman present, the least desired, the least admired, the least likely to manipulate him. It was a terrible plan, but Sebastian believed it was logical. Unfortunately, logic rarely survives contact with reality, especially when reality arrives wearing a veil. The auction took place inside the Royal Assembly Hall. Hundreds attended. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the massive room. Musicians performed softly. Nobles filled every seat. Excitement buzzed through the crowd. One by one, participants were introduced. Beautiful women, elegant women, wealthy women, ambitious women. The bidding was fierce, competitive, predictable. Sebastian remained unimpressed. Then the final participant appeared. Number 27. The room instantly grew quieter, because unlike the others, she wore a veil. Not a decorative veil, a full-face veil, thick enough to conceal her features entirely. Whispers spread immediately. Some guests laughed. Others looked confused. Several noblewomen exchanged mocking smiles. The announcer cleared his throat. Lady Eleanor Vale. Silence. The name meant little to most people. Eleanor belonged to a nearly forgotten noble family. Her father had died years ago. Her estate struggled financially. Society rarely mentioned her. One woman in the audience laughed softly. "Poor thing," another whispered. "She must be hiding something." The rumours had followed Eleanor for years. Some claimed she was horribly scarred. Others claimed she was disfigured. Some insisted she wore the veil because she was unbearably ugly. Nobody knew the truth. Yet everyone repeated the rumours anyway. Sebastian watched from his seat. Curious, not attracted. Curious. The woman stood calmly, despite hundreds of eyes studying her. She neither fidgeted nor looked nervous. She simply waited, dignified, silent, unshaken. That interested him. Most people desperately wanted approval. This woman seemed completely indifferent to it. The auctioneer began. Bidding started low, then stopped almost immediately. No one wanted the veiled woman. No one wanted the rumours. No one wanted the mystery. The silence became awkward, embarrassing, cruel. Eleanor remained motionless. She had clearly expected this. Sebastian observed her carefully. Then he raised his hand. The room froze. Every head turned. The auctioneer blinked. "Your Grace?" Sebastian repeated the bid. Gasps echoed through the hall. Suddenly other men joined. Not because they wanted Eleanor. Because they wanted competition with the Duke. The price climbed. Then climbed again. Then climbed higher. Finally, Sebastian ended it with one decisive bid. Silence. The hammer fell. Sold. Lady Eleanor Vale belonged to Blackmore Castle. Applause followed. But something felt strange. Very strange. Eleanor showed no excitement, no relief, no gratitude. If anything, she looked concerned. As though winning was the last thing she wanted. Sebastian noticed. And for the first time all evening he felt genuine curiosity. Later that night, the formal unveiling ceremony began. It was tradition. The winning lady removed her veil before her future husband. Guests gathered eagerly. The ballroom filled. Rumours spread faster than wine. Everyone wanted to see the face hidden beneath the veil. Everyone expected disappointment. Everyone expected confirmation of the ugly Duckling stories. Sebastian expected the same. He stood before Eleanor. The crowd watched. The musicians stopped playing. The room became completely silent. Eleanor lifted trembling fingers toward the veil, then slowly removed it. The fabric slipped away, fell, and hit the floor. Sebastian froze. Not because she was beautiful. Beauty alone would not have shocked him. Pounds. He froze because the woman standing before him looked exactly like the portrait hanging inside the locked west wing of Blackmore Castle. The portrait nobody had touched in 9 years. The portrait of his mother. Gasps filled the ballroom. The resemblance was impossible. Identical silver eyes, identical smile, identical features. It was as though a ghost had stepped out of the past. Sebastian couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't think. For the first time in 9 years, the Iron Duke hesitated, and somewhere deep inside Blackmore Castle, a secret buried for decades had just begun to wake up. The silence inside the ballroom lasted only a few seconds. But for Sebastian Ashcroft, it felt much longer. The crowd disappeared, the music disappeared, the whispers disappeared. All he could see was Eleanor, standing beneath the chandeliers, holding the veil in trembling hands, looking as confused by his reaction as everyone else. The resemblance was impossible, absolutely impossible. Sebastian knew every detail of the portrait hanging inside Blackmore Castle. He had spent years avoiding it, years refusing to enter the West Wing, years pretending the room didn't exist. Yet the memory remained. Pounds the silver eyes, the shape of the face, the soft curve of the smile, the same features that now stared back at him from a living woman. His mother had died 20 years ago. Eleanor Vale could not possibly be connected to her, and yet the resemblance was undeniable. The crowd finally began whispering again. The sound spread through the ballroom like wind through leaves. What happened? Why is the Duke staring at her? Does he know her? Look at his face. Even Lady Beatrice seemed stunned. She had expected many things tonight. This was not one of them. Eleanor lowered her eyes, clearly uncomfortable, clearly wishing she were somewhere else. Sebastian finally found his voice. "Your name?" The question surprised everyone, especially Eleanor. "My name? Your full name." The room became silent again. Eleanor Margaret Vale. Sebastian's jaw tightened. Margaret. His mother's name had been Margaret Ashcroft. Another coincidence. Nothing more. It had to be. Yet the feeling in his chest refused to disappear. The ceremony ended shortly afterward. Neither Sebastian nor Eleanor said much. Guests continued discussing the strange moment long after midnight. By morning, half the kingdom would hear about it. But the Duke wasn't thinking about gossip. He was thinking about a portrait, a locked room, and a resemblance that made no sense. The journey back to Blackmore Castle took 2 days. Rain followed them for most of the trip. Grey clouds stretched endlessly across the sky. The sea crashed against distant cliffs. Inside the carriage, silence ruled. Eleanor sat opposite Sebastian. Neither seemed eager to speak. Not because they disliked each other, because both were thinking, and neither trusted their thoughts. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. "You regret choosing me." Sebastian looked up. The question surprised him. "You assume that. You spent the entire journey avoiding conversation." A fair observation. Sebastian studied her for several seconds, then answered honestly, "I don't regret choosing you." Eleanor seemed surprised. "Then what is it?" He considered lying. Instead he said, "You remind me of someone." Her expression softened slightly. "Someone important?" "Very." That was all he offered. Eleanor nodded. She didn't push further. Another thing, Sebastian noticed. Most people constantly demanded answers. Eleanor respected silence. The realization lingered. When Blackmore Castle finally appeared on the horizon, Eleanor understood immediately why people spoke about it with such fascination. The castle was enormous. Dark stone towers rose above the cliffs. The ocean stretched endlessly behind it. Storm clouds circled overhead. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Beautiful, lonely, unapproachable. The massive gates opened. Servants lined the entrance. The carriage rolled into the courtyard. Eleanor stepped outside. The wind immediately caught her hair. For several moments she simply stared. The castle felt alive, not warm, not welcoming. Alive. Like a sleeping giant watching everyone who entered. Sebastian noticed her expression. "Intimidating?" Eleanor smiled slightly. "A little." The answer surprised him. Most people would have lied. Most people would have praised the castle. Eleanor simply told the truth. Another thing he noticed. Another thing he unexpectedly liked. The household staff gathered near the entrance. They watched quietly, curiously. Most had heard rumours. Most expected a glamorous future duchess. Instead, they found a woman carrying a worn travelling case and looking slightly overwhelmed by the enormous castle surrounding her. Some seemed disappointed. Others looked relieved. One elderly housekeeper stepped forward. "Welcome to Blackmore, my lady." Her name was Mrs. Holloway. She had served the Ashcroft family for 35 years. Long enough to remember Sebastian's mother. The moment she saw Eleanor clearly, the older woman's eyes widened. Only briefly, but Sebastian noticed. Mrs. Holloway saw the resemblance too. That fact disturbed him more than he cared to admit. Later that evening, Eleanor unpacked her belongings. The process took less than 15 minutes. She owned very little. Several books, a few dresses, writing supplies, pounds, and a wooden box she handled carefully. The room assigned to her was larger than her entire childhood home. She found the size uncomfortable, the luxury unnecessary, the silence overwhelming. For the first time since arriving, uncertainty appeared. What exactly was she doing here? The marriage auction had seemed practical. Her family needed financial stability. The Duke needed a wife. Simple. Now nothing felt simple, especially after seeing his reaction during the unveiling. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Holloway entered carrying tea. The older woman smiled kindly. "You must be tired." Eleanor nodded, a little. Mrs. Holloway hesitated, then asked carefully, "Has anyone ever told you that you resemble the late Duchess Margaret?" There it was. The question Eleanor knew would eventually arrive. She sighed softly. "Many people." The housekeeper sat down. "Your family spoke of it?" Eleanor nodded. "My grandmother especially." The older woman seemed interested. "Why?" Eleanor hesitated, then answered, "Because my grandmother once worked at Blackmore." Mrs. Holloway froze. The room suddenly felt smaller. "What?" Eleanor looked confused. "My grandmother served here as a maid when she was young." The housekeeper stared. A dozen thoughts raced through her mind simultaneously. Because she remembered. She remembered a young maid named Rose Vale. She remembered Rose suddenly leaving the estate. She remembered strange rumours, questions, secrets, conversations that stopped whenever servants approached. Mrs. Holloway slowly sat back. A feeling she hadn't experienced in years stirred inside her. Suspicion. Meanwhile, elsewhere inside the castle, Sebastian unlocked a door he hadn't opened in nearly 3 years. The west wing. Dust covered the corridor. Silence ruled the rooms. Nobody came here anymore, nobody except him, occasionally, reluctantly. At the end of the hallway waited a portrait. Margaret Ashcroft, his mother, the woman whose death had shattered the family. Sebastian stood before the painting, then compared it to the memory of Eleanor. The resemblance remained impossible, not similar, not close, remarkable. His mother's portrait seemed almost alive, watching, waiting, hiding answers. Questions formed one after another. Who was Eleanor really? Why did she look like Margaret? Why had her grandmother worked at Blackmore? Most importantly, why did he suddenly feel as though a secret buried decades ago was beginning to surface? For years, Blackmore Castle had remained unchanged, frozen, predictable, controlled. Then Eleanor Vale arrived, and within 48 hours everything felt different. The servants noticed it first. The house felt less silent, less rigid, less heavy. Not because Eleanor tried to change anything, she simply existed differently. She smiled at servants, learned names, asked questions, helped when unnecessary, small things, ordinary things. Yet inside Blackmore, ordinary warmth had become unusual. 3 days later, she accidentally proved it. The disaster began with soup, a very expensive soup, prepared for an important dinner. Eleanor attempted to help carry dishes. The attempt lasted approximately 12 seconds. Her sleeve caught a serving tray. The tray tilted. The soup launched itself through the air and landed directly on Duke Sebastian Ashcroft. The dining room froze. Every servant stopped moving. Every guest stopped breathing. A footman nearly dropped an entire tray from shock. For a moment, complete silence filled the room. Eleanor stared, horrified, absolutely horrified. "I'm so sorry." Nobody spoke. The Duke slowly looked down at his ruined coat. Then at Eleanor. The room waited, because everyone knew what came next. The Iron Duke would finally reveal his temper, except he didn't. To everyone's astonishment, Sebastian laughed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but genuinely. The sound shocked him almost as much as everyone else, because he couldn't remember the last time laughter arrived naturally. Eleanor blinked, the servants blinked, the guests blinked. Mrs. Holloway nearly sat down from surprise, and somewhere in the back of Sebastian's mind, a disturbing realization appeared. Blackmore Castle had begun changing, and he wasn't entirely sure he wanted it to stop. The following morning began with rain. Blackmore Castle always seemed different during rain. The stone walls darkened. The sea became rougher. The wind carried strange sounds through the corridors. Some servants claimed the castle whispered during storms. Eleanor wasn't sure she believed that. Yet as she walked through the eastern hallway that morning, she understood why people told stories about the place. Blackmore felt old, not simply in age, in memory. The castle carried its history like a person carries scars. Every room seemed to remember something. Every corridor seemed to hide something. And lately, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that some of those hidden things involved her. 3 days had passed since the soup incident. 3 days since the Duke laughed. The servants still discussed it. Quietly, carefully, as though speaking too loudly might somehow undo the miracle. Eleanor found the attention embarrassing. Sebastian found it worse. Every time someone mentioned his laughter, he immediately changed the subject. Mrs. Holloway found the entire situation amusing. The housekeeper watched both of them with increasing satisfaction. She had spent years watching Blackmore suffocate beneath grief. Now something was changing. Slowly, unexpectedly, but undeniably. That afternoon Eleanor discovered the castle library. Or rather, she got lost trying to find the music room, and accidentally found the library pounds instead. The mistake didn't surprise anyone. By now, several servants had noticed that Eleanor possessed an extraordinary ability to walk confidently in the wrong direction. The library was enormous. Thousands of books lined towering shelves. Large windows overlooked the sea. Dust danced through sunlight. The room felt alive. Eleanor immediately loved it. She wandered between shelves, touched book spines, read titles, lost track of time. Then she found something unexpected. A family history book. The Ashcroft family archives. Curiosity one. She opened it. Several pages later she found a portrait. Margaret Ashcroft, the late Duchess. The woman everyone insisted she resembled. Eleanor froze, because for the first time she understood what they meant. The resemblance was shocking. Not identical, but close enough to unsettle anyone. Silver eyes, similar features, the same expression, the same smile. It felt like staring at an older version of herself. A chill ran through her. For several moments she simply stared. Then another discovery caught her attention. A smaller portrait, a young servant standing beside Margaret. The image was tiny, easy to miss. Yet Eleanor recognized her immediately. Rose Vale, her grandmother. The book slipped from her hands. It hit the floor with a loud thud. "Eleanor?" She jumped. Sebastian stood in the doorway. Apparently he had arrived without her noticing. Embarrassing again. Eleanor quickly picked up the book. "I'm sorry." He looked toward the page. His expression changed. "You found it. The portrait." Silence settled between them. Neither seemed eager to discuss it. Finally Eleanor spoke. "My grandmother worked here." Sebastian nodded. "So I've heard." "Did you know her?" A pause, then another. Finally he answered. "Vaguely." The response felt incomplete, careful, measured, as though he deliberately avoided saying more. Eleanor noticed, but didn't push for now. Elsewhere in Blackmore Castle, someone else was becoming increasingly concerned. Lady Celeste Whitmore, the neighbouring count's daughter, beautiful, elegant, ambitious, and deeply interested in becoming Duchess of Blackmore. For nearly 2 years society assumed Sebastian would eventually marry her. Not because he loved her, because she made sense. The match was logical, respectable, expected. Then Eleanor arrived, and suddenly everything changed. Celeste hated uncertainty. More importantly, she hated competition, especially competition she couldn't understand. That evening she arrived at Blackmore for dinner. The moment that she smiled. The kind of smile that looked friendly from across a room, and dangerous from nearby. Eleanor Vale. Her voice sounded pleasant. Lady Celeste. The women exchanged greetings, both perfectly polite, neither particularly sincere. Celeste studied Eleanor carefully. The plain dress, the quiet confidence, the strange resemblance. She understood immediately why Sebastian seemed distracted lately. Not because Eleanor was the most beautiful woman in the kingdom, because she was different. Different could be dangerous, especially when a man was bored. Dinner passed uneasily. Conversation flowed, wine flowed, tension flowed. Then Celeste struck, not openly, subtly, the way experienced social predators always do. "I heard your family experienced financial difficulties." The table grew quieter. Eleanor smiled politely. We did. How unfortunate. The words sounded sympathetic. The tone did not. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Celeste continued. It must have been difficult entering the auction under such circumstances. There it was, the insult hidden inside concern. Eleanor recognized it immediately, so did Sebastian. The room waited. Many expected Eleanor to retreat, apologize, defend herself. Instead, she took a sip of tea, then smiled. It was a pause. Though I imagine entering society while depending entirely on one's father's title must be difficult too. Silence, absolute silence. Several guests nearly choked. One footman walked directly into a wall. Celeste stared. The smile vanished. Sebastian lowered his head, not because he was angry, because he was trying very hard not to laugh again. Dinner ended shortly afterward. The battle belonged to Eleanor. Unquestionably. The servants discussed it for days. Meanwhile, another mystery quietly grew. Mrs. Holloway couldn't stop thinking about Rosevale. The grandmother, the resemblance, the timing, the old rumours. Something felt wrong, or perhaps right. After 35 years serving Blackmore, she trusted her instincts. And her instincts screamed that Eleanor's arrival wasn't coincidence. One rainy evening she entered the estate archives. The room smelled of paper and dust. Old ledgers filled shelves. Boxes contained decades of records. Most people hated the archive room. Mrs. Holloway loved it. Secrets left traces. Paper remembered things people forgot. 3 hours later she found something. A letter. Folded between estate records. Forgotten. Hidden. The handwriting belonged to Margaret Ashcroft. Sebastian's mother, Mrs. Holloway carefully opened it, then froze. Her eyes widened. Her heart raced. Because the letter contained a name, Rosevale, and beneath that name, a sentence. A single sentence capable of changing everything. Mrs. Holloway read it again, then a third time. The words never changed. The implications never softened. Outside, thunder rolled across the sea inside. The elderly housekeeper realized she had just uncovered a secret buried for over 20 years. A secret involving Margaret. A secret involving Rose. A secret involving Eleanor. And perhaps a secret involving the Ashcroft family itself. Upstairs, completely unaware of the discovery, Eleanor sat beside a window overlooking the storm. She watched rain strike the glass, watched waves crash against the cliffs, watched darkness spread across the sea. She felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, she belonged somewhere. Not completely. Not permanently, but enough. Enough to breathe, enough to hope, enough to imagine a future. Unfortunately, hope has a habit of attracting trouble. And trouble was already on its way to Blackmore Castle, because the hidden letter was only the beginning. The real secret remained buried deeper, waiting, watching. And before winter ended, it would force Sebastian Ashcroft to question everything he believed about his family. Everything he believed about his past, and everything he believed about Eleanor Vale. Part 2, Mrs. Holloway barely slept that night. The letter remained hidden inside her desk drawer. Locked, protected, dangerous. Several times she considered bringing it directly to Sebastian. Several times she changed her mind. The problem wasn't the letter itself. The problem was what it suggested. If she was correct, decades of assumptions could collapse overnight. Families had been torn apart by smaller secrets. Blackmore certainly had. By sunrise, the old housekeeper reached a decision. She needed more proof. One letter wasn't enough. Not for something this important. Not for something this explosive. So while most of Blackmore Castle enjoyed breakfast, Mrs. Holloway returned to the archives. The search began again. Meanwhile, Eleanor spent the morning wandering through the gardens. The estate grounds stretched across hundreds of acres. Ancient trees lined winding paths. Stone fountains sat among flowers. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and wild roses. The gardens should have felt beautiful. Instead, they felt abandoned, neglected. lonely, like much of Blackmoor itself. As Eleanor walked, she noticed broken benches, untrimmed hedges, empty flower beds. No one had truly cared for the gardens in years. The realization saddened her, because beneath the neglect she could still see what the gardens once were. A place filled with life, a place filled with laughter, a place people actually enjoyed. She paused near a fountain. The stone angel at its centre had cracked. Water barely flowed, yet somehow it remained beautiful. Something about it reminded her of Sebastian, damaged, silent, still standing. The thought surprised her and embarrassed her. She quickly pushed it away. Across the estate, Sebastian sat inside his office, attempting to focus on business reports. Attempting. Failing. For the third time in 20 minutes, he realized he had been staring at the same page. His thoughts kept drifting. Toward Eleanor, toward the resemblance, toward the growing mystery, toward questions he couldn't answer. A knock interrupted him. Enter. His steward stepped inside. Your Grace, what is it? The steward hesitated, clearly confused. The gardeners have questions. Sebastian frowned. What kind of questions? They say Lady Eleanor requested tools. Silence. Sebastian blinked. Tools? Steward nodded. And seeds. More silence. And apparently she's organised 12 servants. Sebastian stared. What for? The steward looked genuinely uncertain. To restore the south gardens. Pause. Sebastian slowly leaned back. The south gardens had been abandoned 8 years ago. Nobody used them. Nobody cared about them. Nobody even mentioned them. Yet somehow Eleanor had discovered them within a month. And now she intended to fix them. Why? The question lingered. Several hours later, curiosity won. Sebastian walked toward the south grounds. The moment he arrived, he stopped. Workers moved everywhere. Servants carried supplies. Gardeners trimmed hedges. Flower beds were being cleared. Broken benches were repaired. At the centre stood Eleanor. Her dress was covered with dirt. Her hands were dirty. Her hair had escaped its pins. She looked nothing like a future duchess, and somehow she looked happier than anyone else on the estate. Sebastian watched unnoticed. A young gardener approached Eleanor. The man appeared nervous, embarrassed. Eleanor listened patiently. Then she laughed, not at him, with him. Moments later the young gardener smiled. A genuine smile, the kind Blackmoor rarely produced. Sebastian felt something strange. Not jealousy, not irritation, something warmer. Something more dangerous. Admiration. The realization annoyed him immediately. He turned to leave. Unfortunately, at that exact moment, Eleanor spotted him. Their eyes met, caught. For a brief second neither moved. Then Eleanor smiled and waved, like they were old friends. Not a duke and future duchess. It's not strangers, friends. Sebastian almost walked away. Almost. Instead, he approached. What are you doing? Eleanor looked around. Restoring the gardens. I noticed. She smiled. Then why ask? A fair point. Again. Sebastian glanced toward the workers. Why does this matter to you? Eleanor considered the question, then answered honestly. Because people deserve beautiful things. The simplicity of the answer caught him off guard. No speeches, no complicated explanation. Just truth. People deserve beautiful things. For some reason he couldn't stop thinking about those words. That evening another storm arrived. The castle shook beneath thunder. Rain lashed against windows. Most residents retired early, except Mrs. Holloway. The old housekeeper remained deep inside the archives, and shortly before midnight she found it, a second letter. This one older, much older. Carefully folded between estate ledgers. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting belonged to Margaret Ashcroft again, but this time the contents were far more shocking. Mrs. Holloway read slowly. Every sentence increased her disbelief. Every paragraph deepened the mystery. Then she reached the end, and gasped, because suddenly everything made sense. The resemblance. Rosevale. Eleanor. The hidden tension. The unanswered questions. The letter revealed a truth nobody expected, a truth capable of changing lives. The next morning she requested a private meeting with Sebastian. Immediately, urgently. The Duke arrived, looking concerned. Mrs. Holloway rarely requested urgent meetings. Never without reason. He entered her office. The old housekeeper closed the door, locked it, then placed 2 letters on the desk. Sebastian frowned. "What is this?" Mrs. Holloway took a deep breath. "A family secret." The room suddenly felt smaller. Sebastian sat down. Slowly, carefully, he read the first letter, then the second, then both again. Silence followed. Absolute silence. Several seconds passed, then a full minute. Mrs. Holloway waited. Finally Sebastian looked up. His face had gone pale. "This isn't possible." "I thought the same." Sebastian stared at the papers. The words seemed impossible, and yet they existed. Written in his mother's hand. Undeniable, verifiable, real. The letters revealed something Margaret Ashcroft had hidden her entire life. Rose Vale wasn't merely a servant. She had been Margaret's half-sister. A sister nobody publicly acknowledged. A sister born outside marriage. A scandal powerful families preferred to bury. Margaret protected the secret. Protected Rose. Protected the family. And eventually helped Rose leave Blackmoor with enough money to build a new life. The connection remained hidden. Until now. Until Eleanor. Sebastian closed his eyes. The implications crashed through him. Rose Vale, Eleanor's grandmother. Margaret Ashcroft, his mother. That meant Eleanor wasn't simply someone who resembled his family. She was part of it, a distant cousin, related by blood. Not closely enough to create legal problems, but enough to explain everything else. Enough to explain the resemblance. Enough to explain the mystery. Enough to explain why fate suddenly felt involved. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Sebastian asked the question lingering in both their minds. "Does Eleanor know?" Mrs. Holloway shook her head. "I don't think so." The Duke stood, walked toward the window, looked out across the sea. His entire understanding of the situation had changed. Completely. The mysterious resemblance wasn't coincidence. The unsettling familiarity wasn't imagination. Eleanor truly belonged to Blackmoor, in a way neither of them ever suspected. Yet another problem immediately emerged. A much bigger problem, because if this secret became public, certain people would exploit it. People like Lady Celeste, people like ambitious nobles, people who saw opportunity everywhere. The revelation could create chaos, scandal, conflict, and Blackmoor had enough of those already. Unfortunately, events were already moving beyond anyone's control. Because elsewhere in the kingdom, another player had entered the game. Lord Adrian Blackthorne, young, wealthy, charming, dangerous. A man who never accepted defeat. And a man who had attended the marriage auction. A man who believed Eleanor should have been his. When Adrian learned about the strange attention surrounding Eleanor, his interest returned immediately. Not because he loved her, because he wanted to win, because he hated losing, especially to Sebastian Ashcroft, and unlike most rivals, Adrian possessed resources, influence, and patience. The perfect combination for trouble. Back at Blackmoor, Eleanor remained completely unaware. She spent the afternoon planting flowers with gardeners, laughing with servants, helping repair another neglected section of the estate. Everywhere she went, Blackmoor felt lighter, brighter, more alive. Even the staff noticed. Rooms felt warmer, meals felt happier. Conversations lasted longer. The castle itself seemed to be waking up. For the first time in years, people looked forward to tomorrow. And perhaps that was why Sebastian found himself watching her more often. Not intentionally. At least that's what he told himself. Yet somehow his daily walks kept leading toward places where Eleanor happened to be. The gardens, the library, the stables, the village school. Always Eleanor. Always improving something. Always helping someone. Always creating life where life had disappeared. The realization realization frightened him more than he wanted to admit, because admiration was becoming attachment, and attachment had always been dangerous, especially for men who once loved and lost everything. Unfortunately for Sebastian, his heart wasn't the only thing changing. The secrets buried beneath Blackmoor Castle were finally beginning to surface, and once secrets begin rising, they rarely stop until the entire truth follows behind them. Sebastian spent the next several days carrying a secret that changed the way he saw everything around him. Every time he looked at Eleanor, he remembered the letters. Every time she smiled, he saw traces of Margaret Ashcroft. Every time she walked through Blackmoor Castle, he felt as though some forgotten piece of the estate had finally returned home. Yet he told her nothing. Not because he wanted to deceive her, because he needed certainty. The letters proved a connection existed, but too many questions remained unanswered. Why had Margaret hidden the truth? Why had Rose never spoken about it? Why had Eleanor never been told? And perhaps most importantly, who else knew? The answers remained buried somewhere in the past. Unfortunately, the past had started fighting back. One afternoon, a black carriage arrived at Blackmoor Castle carrying an unwelcome guest, Lord Adrian Blackthorne. The moment Sebastian learned who had arrived, irritation settled across his face. Adrian possessed a dangerous talent. He could enter any room and immediately make it feel less trustworthy. He was handsome, wealthy, charming, and completely incapable of accepting defeat. Years earlier, he and Sebastian had competed for business contracts, investment opportunities, political influence. Neither man liked the other, neither bothered pretending otherwise. When Adrian entered the drawing room, his smile appeared friendly. His eyes did not. Sebastian, Adrian. The two men shook hands, neither meant it. Adrian glanced around the room. Then his gaze settled on Eleanor. For a brief moment his expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for Sebastian to notice. Enough for Sebastian to dislike it immediately. "Eleanor Vale," Adrian said warmly. "It has been some time." Eleanor looked surprised. "You remember me?" Adrian laughed. "Of course." That answer bothered Sebastian more than it should have. The afternoon became increasingly unpleasant. Adrian stayed for dinner, then requested a tour of the estate, then somehow managed to spend most of that tour speaking directly to Eleanor. Sebastian watched from a distance, and slowly discovered something extremely annoying. Jealousy. The realization arrived like a slap. He was jealous. Ridiculous. Completely unreasonable and absolutely undeniable. Every time Adrian made Eleanor laugh, Sebastian felt irritated. Every time Eleanor seemed interested in the conversation, he felt worse. By sunset, he wanted Adrian gone, preferably several counties away. Mrs. Holloway noticed everything. The old housekeeper nearly enjoyed herself. After years of watching Sebastian behave like a stone statue, seeing him experience ordinary human emotions felt refreshing. That evening, she found him standing alone on a balcony overlooking the sea. "You're in a terrible mood." Sebastian didn't turn around. "I'm not, you are." Silence. Mrs. Holloway smiled. "Lord Blackthorne seems quite interested in Lady Eleanor." The Duke immediately frowned, a reaction that confirmed everything. Mrs. Holloway almost laughed. "You realize this means you've become predictable?" Sebastian looked horrified. "No, oh yes." She nodded confidently. "Very predictable." The conversation ended shortly afterward, but the damage was done. For the first time, Sebastian could no longer deny what was happening. His feelings were changing, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. Meanwhile, Eleanor remained blissfully unaware. She spent the following week organising repairs throughout the village attached to the estate. The school roof leaked. The clinic needed supplies. Several elderly tenants required assistance. Most noble women would have delegated such work. Eleanor personally visited each location, not because she wanted praise, because she genuinely cared. The villagers noticed, the staff noticed, even Sebastian noticed. One rainy afternoon he accompanied her to the village school. The visit began normally, then disaster struck again. The children loved Eleanor immediately. Unfortunately, they also possessed terrible aim. Within minutes a classroom game ended with paint splattering across Sebastian's expensive coat. Blue paint. Bright blue paint. Directly across the front, the entire classroom froze. 20 children stared in horror. The teacher nearly fainted. Eleanor looked shocked. Then she started laughing. Not intentionally. She tried stopping, failed completely. The laughter spread. Soon the children joined, then the teacher, then even Sebastian. The sound filled the room, warm, real, alive. For several precious moments nobody cared about titles, or status, or reputation. They were simply people sharing a ridiculous moment. Later, while walking back toward the castle, Eleanor smiled. "You laugh more now." Sebastian glanced at her. "Do I?" "Yes." Silence followed. Then she added softly, "I think Blackmore likes it." The words stayed with him. Not because they were clever, because they felt true. Blackmore was changing. The state felt warmer. The staff smiled more. The villagers seemed happier. The castle no longer felt frozen in grief. It felt alive again. And everyone knew why. Everyone except Eleanor. Several days later, another secret emerged. Mrs. Holloway's investigation continued quietly. The more records she uncovered, the more disturbing the truth became. Margaret Ashcroft hadn't merely protected Rose Vale. She had sacrificed enormous amounts to help her. Money, influence, reputation. There was love between the sisters, real love. Yet the family buried the relationship because acknowledging it would have created scandal. The injustice angered Mrs. Holloway deeply, especially because Eleanor had spent years struggling financially, while a branch of her family sat among the wealthiest families in the kingdom. One evening she finally shared her discoveries with Sebastian. The Duke listened carefully, then looked toward the fire. For a long time he said nothing. Finally he spoke. "Eleanor deserves to know." Mrs. Holloway nodded. "Yes, but not yet." The old housekeeper frowned. "Why?" Sebastian stared into the flames. "Because once she learns the truth, everything changes." And he was right. The truth would change everything. Unfortunately, events were moving faster than either of them realized. Because Adrian Blackthorne had discovered something as well. Not the full secret, not yet, but enough to become dangerous. One of his investigators uncovered references to Rose Vale inside old estate records. Another discovered similarities between Margaret Ashcroft and Eleanor. Separately, the details meant little. Together, they suggested something significant. Adrian became obsessed, not with Eleanor, with the mystery. Powerful men often became addicted to secrets, especially secrets involving inheritance and noble bloodlines. He ordered further investigations immediately, and that decision would soon place everyone at Blackmore in danger. Because some people wanted the truth revealed, others wanted it buried, and whenever wealth, family, and old scandals collide, someone always gets hurt. As autumn deepened around Blackmore Castle, the sea grew rougher. Storms became stronger. The nights became colder. Yet inside the estate, warmth continued spreading. The library filled with conversation again. Music returned to the ballroom. The gardens bloomed beyond expectations. Life slowly returned to places where grief had once ruled. For the first time in nearly a decade, Blackmore felt like a home instead of a monument. And for the first time in nearly a decade, Duke Sebastian Ashcroft began imagining a future that included laughter, a future that included family, a future that included Eleanor. What he didn't realize was that fate had already prepared its next move, a move that would expose hidden enemies, reveal shocking truths, and force him to choose between protecting his heart or fighting for the woman who had unknowingly brought Blackmore Castle back to life. Winter arrived early that year. The first snowfall covered Blackmore Castle in white silence. The towers looked softer beneath snow. The gardens rested peacefully. The sea beyond the cliffs turned dark and restless. Most years winter transformed Blackmore into an isolated fortress. Guests stopped visiting. Social events disappeared. The estate retreated into itself. But this winter felt different. For the first time in years, laughter still echoed through the halls. Servants gathered in the evenings to share stories. The library remained busy. The dining room felt warm instead of formal. And somehow, despite every effort to resist it, Sebastian found himself looking forward to each day. He knew why. Everyone knew why. Eleanor. Her presence had changed everything. The realization should have worried him. Instead, it made him strangely happy. One evening, while snow fell outside, Eleanor sat in the library reading beside the fireplace. A blanket rested across her lap. Several books surrounded her. The scene looked peaceful, comfortable, like something that belonged there. Sebastian paused in the doorway. For a moment he simply watched. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she fascinated him, though she did. He watched because the sight felt right. Blackmore Castle finally looked alive, and Eleanor was at the centre of it. The realization frightened him. Because feelings had a way of becoming attachments, and attachments had a way of becoming losses. He knew that better than anyone. Unfortunately, while warmth grew inside Blackmore, danger grew outside it. Lord Adrian Blackthorne had continued investigating. Weeks of searching uncovered more records, more letters, more rumours, and eventually, one important fact. Rose Vale had left Blackmore with financial assistance from Margaret Ashcroft. That discovery alone meant little. Until Adrian learned something else. Margaret's father had personally ordered every record concerning Rose removed from public archives. Removed, not destroyed, hidden. The distinction mattered. People hide things for reasons. Adrian immediately sensed opportunity. By Christmas, he became convinced Blackmore was protecting a family secret, and family secrets often led to power. Or money, or both. That made him dangerous. Very dangerous. Meanwhile, Eleanor remained unaware of the growing threat. She spent her days helping prepare Blackmore for winter celebrations. The village children adored her. The staff adored her. Even the estate dogs followed her everywhere. Only Sebastian remained slightly complicated. Not cold, not distant. Complicated. Sometimes he seemed relaxed around her. Sometimes he became strangely quiet. Sometimes she caught him staring. Only for him to immediately look away. The behaviour confused her. More than once she found herself thinking about it. More than once she found herself wondering whether she wanted the answer. One snowy afternoon everything changed. It began with a simple accident, the kind of accident Eleanor seemed uniquely gifted at creating. She was helping decorate an unused section of the West Wing, the very wing Sebastian usually avoided. Boxes filled with old decorations sat stacked near the walls. Dust covered everything. Most servants disliked entering the area. The atmosphere felt heavy, as though the corridor itself remembered sadness. Eleanor carried a box around a corner, then promptly tripped over a loose floorboard. The box flew, decorations scattered everywhere, and one small wooden chest tumbled from a forgotten shelf. The chest struck the floor. The lock broke. The lid opened. Letters spilled across the corridor. Eleanor groaned. Of course! Carefully she began gathering them, then stopped. One envelope caught her attention. The handwriting looked familiar, very familiar. Margaret Ashcroft, the same name from the archives. The same name from the portraits. The same name connected to her grandmother. Curiosity immediately took hold. She knew she shouldn't read it. She knew it wasn't hers. She knew it was wrong. Yet something about the envelope felt important, almost as if fate had deliberately placed it in her path. Slowly she turned it over, then froze, because beneath Margaret's name appeared another. Rose, her grandmother, The world suddenly felt very quiet. Her hands trembled. For several seconds she simply stared. Then footsteps echoed behind her. Eleanor quickly lowered the letter. Sebastian emerged from the corridor. The moment he saw the envelope, his expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. Enough for Eleanor to notice, enough for her heart to begin racing. Silence stretched between them. Finally she held up the letter. "What is this?" Sebastian didn't answer immediately. That silence told her everything. Her stomach tightened. You knew. Again silence. The realization hit harder than expected. Not because of the secret. Because everyone seemed to know except her. Sebastian. His expression softened. "Eleanor, what is it?" The question came out sharper than intended. Years of confusion suddenly rushed forward. The resemblance, the whispers, the strange reactions. The questions nobody answered. All of it. She deserved the truth. Finally, Sebastian looked at the envelope, then at her, then quietly said, "Your grandmother was my mother's sister." The corridor seemed to tilt. For a moment Eleanor genuinely thought she misheard him. "What?" "My mother and Rose Vale were sisters." Silence. Absolute silence. Snow tapped softly against distant windows. The castle seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor stared, trying to understand, trying to process, trying to make sense of years of unanswered questions. "My grandmother," Sebastian nodded. "Yes." The truth arrived slowly, like dawn, like heartbreak, like understanding. Suddenly everything made sense. The resemblance, the portrait, the reactions, the letters, the mystery, all of it. And yet instead of relief, Eleanor felt something else, pain. Because if this was true, then her grandmother had spent her entire life separated from family. Separated from people who should have known her, should have helped her, should have loved her. Tears filled her eyes. Sebastian stepped forward, then stopped unsure. For perhaps the first time in his life, the Duke genuinely didn't know what to do. Finally he spoke softly. "I'm sorry." Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Why are you apologizing?" "Because you should have known." The words hung between them, simple, honest, true, and somehow they mattered. A lot. For several moments neither moved. Then Eleanor surprised herself. She stepped forward and hugged him. Not because everything was fixed. Not because she wasn't hurt. Because she suddenly understood something important. The secret wasn't his fault. The silence wasn't his choice. The past belonged to people long gone. Sebastian froze, completely. No one hugged the Duke, ever. Yet slowly, almost cautiously, he returned the embrace. The moment lasted only seconds. But neither forgot it, neither would. Unfortunately, someone else had already learned about the secret, and unlike Sebastian, he had no intention of protecting Eleanor. Lord Adrian Blackthorne finally uncovered enough evidence to understand the truth. Not every detail, but enough. Enough to create scandal. Enough to create headlines. Enough to create chaos. The very next morning, newspapers across the kingdom published explosive rumours. Rumours linking Eleanor Vale to the Ashcroft family. Rumours questioning inheritance. Rumours questioning legitimacy. Rumours questioning everything. By noon, Blackmore Castle stood at the centre of the largest social scandal in years. And this time, the threat wasn't hidden. It wasn't buried in archives. It wasn't locked inside old letters. It was public. And it was coming directly for Eleanor. Pounds. The peace she had finally found was about to be tested. The future she had begun imagining was about to be threatened. And Duke Sebastian Ashcroft was about to discover how far he was willing to go to protect the woman he loved. The scandal exploded faster than anyone expected. By evening, every major newspaper in the kingdom carried some version of the story. Some articles claimed Eleanor was secretly an Ashcroft heir. Others suggested she had deliberately entered the marriage auction to gain access to Blackmore Castle. The most vicious reports accused her of manipulating Sebastian from the beginning. None of it was true, but truth rarely travels as quickly as gossip. Blackmore Castle immediately became the centre of public attention. Reporters gathered outside the gates. Curious visitors arrived daily. Letters flooded the estate. Most contained questions. Some contained accusations. A few contained outright hatred. Eleanor read several before Mrs. Holloway quietly removed the rest. "No more?" the housekeeper said firmly. Eleanor didn't argue. The words hurt more than she wanted to admit. Not because strangers disliked her. Because many of them sounded so certain. Certain she was dishonest. Certain she was ambitious. Certain she was using Sebastian. After all the effort she spent helping Blackmore, rebuilding the gardens, helping the villagers, and caring for the people around her, it only took a few newspaper headlines to convince the world she was a villain. The realization was painful. One afternoon she escaped to the cliffs overlooking the sea. The wind was strong. The waves crashed violently below. Grey clouds covered the horizon. Normally the view comforted her. Today it didn't. She stood alone for nearly an hour before hearing footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around. She already knew who it was. Sebastian stopped beside her. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt familiar now. Comfortable. Eventually he said, "You shouldn't read those papers." Eleanor smiled sadly. "I know." Another pause. "They don't know you. They don't need to." Sebastian looked toward the ocean. "Yes, they do." The certainty in his voice surprised her. He continued. "The people writing those stories don't know who rebuilt the South Gardens." Silence. "They don't know who repaired the village school." The wind tugged at his coat. "They don't know who convinced half the staff to smile again." Eleanor felt tears threatening to return. Sebastian rarely spoke emotionally, which made every word matter more. "They only know rumours." He finally looked at her. "And rumours have never impressed me." For several moments she couldn't speak. The simple sincerity of his words affected her more than grand speeches ever could, because he meant them, every word. For the first time since the scandal began, she felt slightly stronger. Unfortunately, the situation continued worsening. Lord Adrian Blackthorne wasn't finished. The scandal wasn't his final move. It was merely the beginning. Several days later he arrived at Blackmore Castle without invitation. Sebastian was already waiting. The atmosphere inside the drawing room felt cold enough to freeze water. Neither man bothered pretending to be pleased. Adrian entered confidently. Too confidently. The smile on his face immediately irritated Sebastian. "You've caused enough trouble." Adrian laughed softly. "I haven't started yet." The honesty shocked no one. Sebastian folded his arms. "What do you want?" Adrian sat comfortably, like a man visiting his own estate. "What everyone wants. And what is that?" "The truth." The word sounded ridiculous coming from him. Sebastian's expression darkened. "You mean leverage?" Adrian smiled. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Silence followed. Then Adrian revealed his real purpose. "There are questions surrounding inheritance." Sebastian immediately understood. Of course, money, titles, property, that was always the destination. Adrian continued. "If Eleanor possesses legitimate family connections, certain claims deserve our examination." The implication hung heavily in the room. Sebastian took a step forward. Dangerous calm settled over him. The kind of calm storms have before destruction. "Eleanor doesn't want titles." Adrian shrugged. "That hardly matters. It matters to me." For the first time, Adrian's smile faded slightly, because he recognized something. Protectiveness, not obligation, not responsibility. Something much deeper, something far more personal. The realization changed everything. Adrian studied Sebastian carefully, then slowly smiled again. Only this time the smile looked different, knowing, satisfied. "You love her." The room became completely silent. Neither man moved, neither looked away. Finally Sebastian answered, "Leave." Adrian laughed. Not because the situation was funny, because the answer told him everything. The game had changed. The ruthless Duke, who once treated emotions like weaknesses, had finally fallen in love, and that made him vulnerable. Adrian departed shortly afterward, but the damage remained, because for the first time Sebastian could no longer deny the truth. Not to Adrian, not to himself. He loved Eleanor. The realization should have brought clarity. Instead it created fear, real fear. Because loving someone meant risking loss. It meant risking heartbreak. It meant risking everything he spent years protecting. That night he walked through the West Wing alone. The old portrait of Margaret Ashcroft waited at the end of the corridor. As always, silent, watching. Sebastian stopped before it. For years he blamed himself for failing people he loved. First his mother, then Vivienne, now Eleanor. The fear felt familiar. The possibility of losing someone important felt terrifying. Yet standing there, staring at the portrait, he realized something else. Avoiding love had never protected him. It only made him lonely. The realization struck harder than expected. Across the castle, Eleanor fought a battle of her own. Because despite everything, despite the kindness she received from Sebastian, despite the support of the staff and villagers, doubt had begun creeping into her thoughts. Perhaps she truly didn't belong here. Perhaps the scandal would never end. Perhaps Blackmore deserved peace. And perhaps she was the reason peace remained impossible. The idea refused to leave her. Day after day it grew stronger, until finally she made a decision, a painful one. The following morning she packed her belongings. The process took less than 30 minutes, just as it had when she first arrived. Several books, a few dresses, the wooden box, nothing more. Mrs. Holloway discovered her in the middle of packing. The older woman's face immediately fell. No, Eleanor paused. I have to. No, Mrs. Holloway, no. The housekeeper's voice cracked. For the first time since Eleanor arrived, genuine emotion overwhelmed her composure. You can't leave. Eleanor lowered her eyes. I don't want Blackmore suffering because of me. The older woman stepped closer. My dear girl. Tears filled her eyes. Blackmore isn't suffering because of you. A pause. It's alive because of you. The words hurt, because part of Eleanor desperately wanted to believe them. But fear remained stronger. The scandal continued spreading. The pressure continued growing. And she couldn't ignore the feeling that everyone would be happier if she simply disappeared. By afternoon the carriage stood waiting. Snow fell softly from grey skies. The servants gathered quietly. Many looked heartbroken. Some openly cried, the gardeners, the kitchen staff, the stable hands, the villagers who travelled to the estate after hearing rumours of her departure. All of them came, because somewhere along the way Eleanor Vale had become part of Blackmore, part of their lives, part of their family. She hugged Mrs. Holloway, thanked the staff, then stepped toward the carriage. The door opened. She took one final look at the castle, at the towers, at the windows, at the home she never expected to love, and then she heard a voice. Eleanor. The entire courtyard froze. Sebastian stood at the top of the steps. Snow drifted around him. The wind pulled at his coat. For several seconds nobody moved. Then he walked forward, slowly, purposefully, directly toward her. And for the first time since she arrived at Blackmore Castle, the Iron Duke looked afraid, not of scandal, not of gossip, not of society, afraid of losing her. And everyone watching suddenly realized the same thing. The ruthless Duke, who once believed emotions were weaknesses, was finally prepared to fight for the one thing that mattered more than pride. The woman standing beside the carriage. The courtyard remained completely silent. Snow drifted through the cold afternoon air. No one moved, no one spoke. Every servant, every villager, every stable hand, every gardener. All of them watched Sebastian Ashcroft walk toward the carriage. For years the Duke had been known for many things. Discipline, authority, control, but not vulnerability. Never vulnerability. Yet as he crossed the courtyard everyone could see it. He was terrified, not of public scandal, not of political consequences, not of Lord Adrian Blackthorne, terrified of arriving too late. Eleanor stood beside the carriage door. Her heart pounded. Part of her wanted to leave, part of her wanted to stay, and neither part seemed willing to surrender. Sebastian stopped a few feet away. For several seconds neither spoke. The snow continued falling. The castle loomed behind them. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Sebastian broke the silence. "Don't go." The words were simple, honest, raw, and completely unlike him. Eleanor stared. She had imagined countless conversations over the past several days. None sounded like this. "Sebastian!" He shook his head. "No." Another step forward. "I'm done pretending." The courtyard became even quieter, if such a thing was possible. The Duke looked directly at her. "I spent years convincing myself that feelings were dangerous." His voice remained calm, but emotion lived beneath every word. "I convinced myself that distance was safer." A pause. "I convinced myself that if I never cared too much, I could never be hurt again." Eleanor felt tears gathering. The servants looked stunned. Mrs. Holloway openly cried. Sebastian continued. "And then you arrived." His gaze never left hers. "You rebuilt the gardens." A faint smile appeared. "You repaired the school." Another pause. "You convinced my staff that smiling wasn't illegal." Several people laughed through tears, even Eleanor. Sebastian's expression softened. The castle changed. He looked toward Blackmore, then back at her. "No." His voice lowered. "I changed." The truth landed heavily, because everyone knew it was real. Every person standing there had witnessed it. The Duke, who once lived like a ghost, had slowly become human again, and Eleanor was the reason. A tear slipped down her cheek. Sebastian took another step forward. "I don't care what the newspapers say." Snow settled across his shoulders. "I don't care what society thinks." The wind carried his words through the courtyard. "I don't care about rumours." Another step. The distance between them shrank. All pretense vanished, all defences disappeared. Only honesty remained. "I care about you." Silence. Beautiful. Terrifying. Perfect silence. Then came the words nobody expected the Duke to say. The words he had spent months trying not to feel. The words that changed everything. "I love you." Eleanor closed her eyes. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Months of uncertainty. Months of friendship. Months of growing affection. All of it finally reached this moment. When she opened her eyes again, Sebastian was still there. Still waiting. Still vulnerable. Still brave enough to risk rejection. And suddenly she understood something important. She wasn't afraid of staying. She was afraid of being happy. Because happiness meant something to lose. But life had already taught her something else. The possibility of loss was never a reason to refuse love. Slowly she smiled, then she stepped toward him. The movement alone seemed to release the entire courtyard from suspense. A collective breath escaped hundreds of people. Eleanor reached him, looked directly into his eyes, and whispered, "You took long enough." The laughter that followed echoed across the estate, warm, relieved, joyful. For a second Sebastian simply stared. Then he laughed, a real laugh, the kind that reached his eyes. The kind Blackmore Castle had almost forgotten. Eleanor wrapped her arms around him. This time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, no fear. Sebastian held her tightly. The snow continued falling. The villagers cheered, the servants applauded. Mrs. Holloway nearly collapsed from happiness, and somewhere deep within Blackmore Castle, it felt as though decades of sadness finally released their grip. The following weeks brought challenges. The scandal didn't disappear overnight. Lord Adrian continued spreading rumours. Newspapers continued speculating. Society continued gossiping. But something had changed. Neither Sebastian nor Eleanor faced those battles alone anymore. They faced them together, and together proved remarkably difficult to defeat. The turning point arrived unexpectedly. 1 month later. Inside a courtroom, the investigation into Eleanor's family history finally concluded. Historians, lawyers, genealogists, estate experts, everyone reached the same conclusion. Eleanor's connection to the Ashcroft family was genuine, but it carried no legal claim to Blackmore. No inheritance dispute, no hidden fortune, no scandal. The truth was surprisingly simple. Margaret Ashcroft had loved her half-sister, protected her, helped her, and hidden the relationship only because society at the time would have destroyed both families. The official findings became public. Newspapers quickly changed tone. Suddenly Eleanor transformed from opportunist to victim, from scandal to sympathy, from controversy to admiration. Adrian's carefully built campaign collapsed almost overnight. The public hated being manipulated, especially when they discovered someone deliberately spread misinformation. His reputation suffered, his influence weakened, and eventually he retreated from the fight entirely. For the first time in months, peace returned. Real peace. Not temporary, not fragile, lasting. Spring arrived shortly afterward. The snow melted. Flowers returned. The sea grew calmer. Blackmore Castle looked different than it had a year earlier. The gardens bloomed brilliantly. The hallways felt alive. Music returned regularly. Guests visited. Children played in the village. Laughter echoed through rooms that once knew only silence. Life had returned. One afternoon Sebastian stood in the restored South Gardens. The same gardens Eleanor had rebuilt. The same gardens where many people first noticed Blackmore changing. Guests gathered nearby, family members, villagers, friends, staff. Everyone seemed unusually excited, because today was special. Today was their wedding. Unlike the grand ceremonies preferred by society, this celebration remained simple, elegant, personal, real, exactly the way Eleanor wanted, exactly the way Sebastian secretly preferred. As the ceremony began, sunlight broke through clouds overhead. The timing felt almost magical. Mrs. Holloway cried through most of the service. Several gardeners cried too, though they denied it later. The village children scattered flower petals. The staff smiled proudly, and when Eleanor finally walked toward him, Sebastian forgot about everyone else entirely. For a moment the world narrowed. Only her, only them, only this. The vows were simple, promises instead of performances, truth instead of spectacle. And when the ceremony ended, applause erupted across the gardens. Not because a duke married, not because a title changed hands, because everyone understood what they had witnessed. A broken man choosing life again, a forgotten woman discovering where she belonged. Two people healing wounds neither expected to survive. The celebrations continued late into the evening. Music filled the gardens. Lanterns illuminated pathways. The castle glowed warmly against the night sky. At one point, Eleanor slipped away from the crowd. She found herself standing beside the old fountain she restored during her first weeks at Blackmore. The same fountain she once compared to Sebastian, damaged, silent, still standing. Now water flowed freely. Flowers surrounded it, children laughed nearby. It looked alive, just like Blackmore. Just like Sebastian, just like her. Footsteps approached. She smiled before turning. Sebastian, of course, you disappeared. I needed a moment. He joined her beside the fountain. Together they watched the water sparkle beneath lantern light. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Sebastian said quietly, "You know something strange?" "What?" "I spent years thinking Blackmore saved me." Eleanor looked at him. He smiled. "I was wrong." A pause. "You did?" Tears immediately filled her eyes. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they survived together. The grief, the loneliness, the fear, the healing, all of it. Eleanor rested her head against his shoulder. The music continued in the distance. The castle stood proudly behind them. And for the first time in many years, Blackmore Castle no longer felt haunted by the past. It felt hopeful about the future. Years later, Visitors would still tell stories about the ruthless duke who attended a marriage auction, determined to choose the plainest woman in the room, the woman everyone underestimated, the woman society mocked, the woman hidden behind a veil. They would tell stories about the moment the veil fell, about the shock, about the mystery, about the secret connection. But the people who truly knew the story always smiled when they heard those versions, because they understood something others missed. The greatest surprise wasn't what Sebastian saw when Eleanor unveiled her face. The greatest surprise was what happened afterward. The ruthless duke expected to rescue an ugly duckling. Instead, she rescued him. And that changed everything.